I'd like to get started, and before I do, I want to give you fair warning that we're going to mix it up tonight. Because usually we are all over you about not commenting and sticking with a question instead of an opinion. And tonight, it is about opinions more than it is questions. You could do either one, but I'll talk a little bit about that when we get further on in the program. But tonight is all about a dialogue about some research. I'm going to introduce the folks who did that work for us on what our community is valuing when we think about growth. How do we reframe it? How do we address it in a positive way that encourages participation, that encourages some good policy making and some good decision making from our business community as well? So I'm really looking forward to this. So I want to introduce Ward Hubbell. Ward is with Hubbell Research and Communications, and he is just starting up a new office here in Bend in the last several months, and we welcome him to our community. And as part of this, he and I have been meeting over several months trying to think about what is the conversation that needs to be had about growth and about productively moving forward as a community as we deal with the influx of folks. And so they have done this research on their own dime, and it's been a collaborative effort. We've had EDCO and Opportunity Knox and all sorts of organizations, Bend 2030, have been part of this discussion and formulating the questions before we could share the answers with you tonight. And also it's my honor to introduce Adam Davis, who I go in the way, way back machine with in previous iterations. So Davis Mitchell Hibbets, or Davis Hibbets Mitchell now, right? It has also changed over the years. Is a research firm based out of Portland, major firm in the Pacific Northwest doing polling and research on public opinion and things like community values. So he conducted the research alongside Hubbell, and they both are going to give a presentation today of what their findings were, what their perceptions are, what they think that the teachable moment is about what we learned. So without any further ado, Ward, are you kicking us off? Welcome, Ward Hubbell.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. And let me just say, we could not have done this without the Bend Chamber and a lot of you in this room, so we really appreciate the support here and glad this topic is of interest. So you might wonder who that insanely young man is. It's actually me 20 plus years ago, right after we moved to Oregon, and that's my beautiful young daughter who's now 24 years old and living in Nashville. The reason I have this up here is because that was a day that really kind of helped to inspire this study. It piqued my interest in this topic because I recall this day, and let me tell you about that. We had just moved to Oregon, and I had wandered down to my brand new mailbox in Lake Oswego, and I struck up a conversation with my mail carrier, and I'd never really had a conversation with a mail carrier before, but we had this long conversation about crabbing in the Tillamook Bay. And what came next even was more surprising. 2 days later, I ended up in the Tillamook Bay with my mail carrier and his daughter, who's about the same age as mine, and we're crabbing in the Tillamook Bay. We're checking crab traps. The reason that was so extraordinary to me is because it struck me how open people in Oregon are, how willing they are to let you into their lives. I come from a place, you can probably tell, I come from a place south of here. And, you know, we're known for being friendly, but we're not going to let you too close. You know, we got to get to know you for a couple of decades before we have you over. But this was one of many encounters I've had in the 2+ decades I've lived here where people really let you into their lives, and it's oftentimes around some sort of outdoor passion. And so the reason this came to mind is because we, as Katie said, we opened up an office out here, and we began to hear this story about growth and how people were nervous about it and maybe even discouraging folks from moving here, that famous bumper sticker. And it made me wonder, you know, is Bend and maybe Oregon itself becoming less open, less inviting, less willing to let strangers in? And that's really what kind of piqued our interest, and so we decided that we would look at this issue and try to feel how people really feel about it, and see if there is maybe a better way to talk about it that might cause people to become excited as opposed to take their corners. So that's kind of how we got here. Our methodology, as Katie said, we've been working on this for about 6 months. We began with some conversations that were facilitated by the Chamber and Katie. We then did a qualitative focus group that Adam presided over to help us figure out what the issues were that we could then turn into a quantitative online poll, which is what we're going to be sharing with you tonight. So Adam's going to go through some of the results, and I'll go through some of the results, and then I think we're going to have some discussion. So my partner in crime.
Thank you, Ward. Let me have the clicker. Gotta watch this guy. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. One of my favorite parts of the state. Unlike Ward, I was born and raised in Oregon, Ward, and have been studying values and beliefs of Oregonians since 1977 when I founded the firm. We were the first ones that designed and administered the Oregon Values and Belief Studies study, and we've been tracking that work for a long time. And what we're talking about this evening are values and beliefs, aren't we? So very quickly, I want to touch on some highlights. Highlights from what was a 32-question survey and 53 pages of crosstabs. Let's boil it down to some takeaways, okay? This is a biggie. 58% of Bend residents think growth is having a negative impact on Bend. So take that in, 58%. An interesting finding that we reported in a city survey not too long ago is that the number of people who feel that Bend is an excellent place to live has dropped 25 percentage points in the last 4 years. So you look for validation, right? Never depend on one data point, but look at what's going on in other work that you're doing, other research you're doing in an area, and what you're doing in other areas of Oregon, okay, that are similar demographically and psychographically, lifestyle-wise, to Bend. While we were doing this study, I was doing a study in Washington County about growth. You guys, I got to tell you, I could take the Washington County people, put them in the Bend group in the Washington County group, and I would have been hearing the same things. Now, here's what the issues are for folks. They don't feel this growth is benefiting everybody. It's not creating family wage jobs, and it's creating too many problems for people today and for the next generation, and we're going to look at those problems very quickly in a moment. 80%, not surprisingly, want their Bend leaders to do more to prepare for and manage growth, and I know this is front and center for City Council here in Bend. And while 52% of people feel that the folks that are moving here do share the same values and beliefs about what makes Bend a unique place to live, work, and play, 48% do not. So take that in. 48% feel people moving here do not share the same values and beliefs about what makes Bend a unique place to live, work, and play. And more, 56% believe Bend's growth is attracting the wrong kind of people and will make it harder to solve the community's problems. So let's talk a little about the problems, about the issues, about the concerns and the priorities. Very quickly, at the top of the list is transportation. Transportation. A lot of you deal with it. And part of that transportation, the biggest part of that concern is what? Traffic congestion. Okay? So that's number one. Affordability is a big issue with people, and what makes up that affordability concern is what? Housing. I can't tell you the number of times affordability came up in the large group study we did, and we saw it in the survey as well. And finally, a very big one. The second highest priority for residents is living wage jobs and diversifying the economy. And there's a relationship between that and affordability. Well, if we're going to do something about this, and all you folks are very engaged in the community, the way this community is going to be going depends on you folks staying engaged and getting other people engaged, right? But let's see what folks are feeling. No doubt about it that 60% feel engagement is an important part of what it means to live in Bend. But here's what I want to point out to all of you is that only 13% say they are regularly involved in the community, and 34% say they are not at all involved in their community. So for a group of all of you who are engaged in community, this is something to keep in mind. So that's a quick overview of, it's just the tip of the mountain, you guys. You have got those crosstabs, and we have subgroup variations, and Katie has the whole shooting match. Okay, back to you.
Thank you, and that, thank you. Okay, and as Adam said, there is so much in the written report. I know we're going to be hashing out here a little bit after we get through talking, but I would encourage everybody to read it, because there's only so much you can say in 15 or 20 minutes about something like that. So just switch gears here. You know, what kind of economy do the people in Bend want? Well, we asked that question. And specifically, we said, you know, look out over 20 years and tell us, what do you see Bend looking like from an economic standpoint? So you can read it. A hub for innovation, 9%. A hub for arts and culture, 16. But here's where the big ones are. A hub for outdoor recreation lifestyles and a highly skilled workforce with a middle class, thriving middle class. I think this is one of the meatiest parts of this study, because it tells you what people in Bend want to grow up into, right? I think as Adam talked about some of the consternation about people coming into Bend, I think is fueled somewhat by the fact that not everybody is sure about what Bend's growing into, and so this, I think, is something pretty powerful, and it should tell you and everybody else that's kind of what people envision as a kind of a endpoint for all this growth. Now, let me ask you, who's seen this bumper sticker? All right, now tell the truth. Who's got it on your car? Okay, all right. So we wanted to take that question about what kind of economy do you envision for the city of Bend, and see if it translated to something physical like a bumper sticker. It was just kind of a fun way of doing it. So everybody knows about this one, and this is kind of what got our interest in doing this study in the first place. So we tried 3 different bumper stickers, and we asked people, they're more positive versions of this, and we said, if you had to pick, you know, a positive version of this, which one would you go for? So the first one was Bend is for disruptors, this innovation thing. So this is an innovative culture where people come and they invent and they create and they solve, you know, world hunger and all those sorts of things. That scored 15%. Okay. The second bumper sticker, Bend is better, come participate. This is all about the culture and the cohesiveness of the community, and you know what Bend is all about. You know, that sort of thing from a cultural standpoint. It came in at a respectable 25%. Okay. The one that took the cake was this one. Bend rocks, come play. All right, 61%. So, you know, what that's basically saying is that you know, we envision ourselves as probably what we've been for a long, long time, which is a community that revolves around the outdoors, it revolves around nature, and that's really what's important to us. And you add to that the other result we had, which people really want to see a thriving middle class, and I think you get the picture. So anyway, that was kind of a fun way to get at that one. The other thing we found was that there are some messages, or let me put it differently. There is information that if people are aware of it, they will, their impressions or their views on growth will improve, okay? And these are things these are all true, and these are things that were presented in the survey, and people had a chance to sort of react to them. So the first one is that visitors invest $640 million annually in local businesses. When people receive that information, 76% of them reported being more favorable towards growth than they were before receiving that information, okay? New residents create new jobs. The way we asked that question was, how would you feel about growth in Bend if you knew that 38% of the new jobs in Bend were created by people who are relative newcomers or worse to that effect? Okay, so 72% of people reported feeling more positively about growth than they did before hearing that. And then the third one is that tourism taxes support roads and infrastructure maintenance. Okay, when people receive that information, there's 70% of them report being more positive toward growth. Now, a couple more that came in a little less robust, but still significant, were these. If people understand that in the past 10 years during the explosive growth of Bend, from a population standpoint, the arts and culture scene has also exploded and has become much more robust. 59% report that being positively impacting their views on growth. And then if you let them know that despite the fact that the population has doubled or close to it, the crime rate has pretty much stayed the same. 48% report feeling better about growth when receiving that information. So the message here is that yes, people have got negative views about growth. It's really more about the effects of growth, and when you connect outcomes that align with their values and what they hope to see from this community, their views on growth improve. So, just some takeaways here. Majority have a negative perception of growth, 58%, but again, presented with information that can change. Two, and this is another, I think, a very good piece of news here. We looked at people who had moved to Bend a year ago. We looked at people who've been in Bend more than 20 years, and we found that pretty much regardless of that or any other demographic categories, people are pretty aligned in terms of their values and their priorities for the city. Now, as Adam said earlier, there's a lot of mistrust about among the citizens of Bend about who's coming in, right? But we found that the data tells us that the people who are coming in are kind of like the people who are here now, right? And so there's a little bit, I think there's a little bit of anxiety, as I mentioned earlier, this anxiety about, what are we growing into, and am I still going to have a place here, right? If that's how you feel, then you're naturally going to feel a little apprehensive about people who are coming in because you think they're going to change the place in a way that you can no longer participate. So that I think is a very important finding, and also the fact that pretty much across the board, people agreed on the priorities: transportation, affordability, a strong middle class, relieving congestion. Not a lot of space between people on those issues. Very, very consistent. And as I alluded to earlier, it's not really about growth, is it? I mean, no, you know, we didn't get the impression in the focus group or in the survey that people are really bothered by the population of Bend. You know, that, oh my gosh, we hope we never become a city of 100,000, or hope we never become a city of 120,000. They're concerned about the effects of Bend. I mean, the effects of growth, right? And as Adam pointed out earlier, 80% are very desirous of city leaders doing more to accommodate for growth. So this idea that there's a debate going on about whether growth is good or bad or whether we should allow it or not, our survey would suggest that conversation's over, that it's time now, and I think it's a big green light for the city and for the leadership of this community to really embrace growth and to lean into it and to talk about the ways in which they are managing growth to achieve the outcomes that people have told us that they want to achieve, right? So I think that's a really big takeaway there. And then finally, the messages must align actions with priorities and values. You know, simply put, I think that, you know, Bend, people we surveyed, Bend doesn't want to turn into a Silicon Valley. Bend doesn't want to turn into an Aspen. I think what Bend wants to turn into is a better version of itself. A place where people get out and play, and they enjoy the amenities of Central Oregon and the city. And people all along the socioeconomic scale have equal access to those things. And I think that to the extent that when, you know, whether you're talking about transportation funding or you're talking about development or you're talking about housing or whatever you're talking about as leadership of the city, if you can connect what you're doing to the outcomes that people have indicated to us that they want to see, I think the conversation shifts and it becomes much more positive. So, with that, I would invite everybody, you can go on our website, you can download the full report. I'm not nearly articulate enough to tell you everything you need to know in that report. Adam probably is, but I know I'm not. So I'd encourage you to get in there and read it. As I've said many times, we really didn't have any axe to grind with this thing. We just felt like this was an important topic. We wanted to examine it. We wanted to offer this up and to be used in any way that folks around here would like to use it. So anyway, with that, I'll turn it back over to Katie.
Great. Thank you very much.
You read this?
Hold on to it. Yeah, I think we're good. So before I go and turn your attention to the panel here, follow-up question to you, Adam. We didn't get into the demographics too much of this survey, and one of the things that we wanted to accomplish, that Ward wanted to accomplish with this, and Adam, was something that was statistically valid, because we often hear from people that have a very strong opinion in public processes, and which is great. That's exactly what you need. But you also need kind of some background information that you can statistically go back and say, as community leaders or business leaders, I get what you're saying, and here's what other folks think. So would you mind, Adam, addressing how we went about going out and getting a wide variety of input?
Great. Absolutely right, Katie. I'm glad I have an opportunity here to address this. I want to assure all of you that this was a valid and statistically reliable sample of all city residents. Here's what's going on in our industry. Our industry is changing and changing quickly, and it's getting more and more difficult to get representative samples. This was a representative sample. The way you assure that is by sampling the general population and not just voters. A lot of the surveys you read about are surveys of who? Voters. And often who? Likely voters. Not even all voters, but likely voters. You'll be seeing a lot of surveys reported tomorrow and the next day about the State of the Union address that's going on right now that you're all missing, and I'm sure you're regretting every second of it. But they're not sampling the full population. Voters are what? They tend to skew older, higher education, higher income. General population, we worked real hard in this study to shine a light on how everyone is feeling. Younger people, people of color, newer residents, lower income and lower education. The way you do that in our industry now is by establishing demographic quotas and then tweaking things at the end using statistical weighting. That's where our industry is going right now. The age of telephone surveys quickly coming to an end. Do you answer your phone when it rings? No. So what's happening is more and more work is being done on online panels that are large, that represent different demographic and psychographic groups that we then select from, just like we used to select from telephone directories to assure that we have a full sample. So it really was fun for me, Katie, to be able to reach out. I mean, if you could see the faces, the ages, the ethnicities around that large group study, which also we worked real hard at making represent, because you've got to get beyond the shrill ends of the opinion spectrum. Like Katie said, the people you hear from all the time, one side or the other, and where is that bell on the bell-shaped curve? So I think it's a good piece of work that you can all rely on.
Great, and so the sample was how long you've lived here, and want to go through that?
Yeah, what we did was make sure that we had a good representation by gender, by age, by education, area of the city, all the way through it. And I'm not going to read you all the percentages because it's going to go in one ear and out the other. But then to assure you, when we set those quotas, those are the demographic quotas we're looking at. And if we did not set it, we'd have 70% women and about 30% guys participating in this. And we'd have no one between the ages of 18 and 44 participating in it. So those are our bugaboos these days when we do this kind of research.
You guys did a great job of capturing that, and ethnicity and the length of time you've lived in Bend. There was a lot of cross sections which we can glean a lot of great information. So with that, I'm going to put it on pause for a minute, and I want to introduce our fabulous panel. So Eric King is City Manager, City of Bend. Preston Callicott is with 5 Talent and one of our innovators here in the city, and I'm sure you were crying at that 15% because people love the innovation. I'm one, I love innovation. And then Kirk Schuler with Brooks Resources, a developer. And then David Welton with YIMBY, that's Yes in My Backyard, which is an organization that has built up over the last couple of years or so here in Bend. And I'm gonna have them, as I ask the questions, kind of introduce who they are, what they're doing, a little bit about your companies and your background, just so folks know a little bit about that. But I'm gonna start off with you, Eric. And what I've asked these people to do with us tonight is to share their perspective. What did you get from this presentation in your world? How do you apply the information that we are learning from all sorts of people across all sorts of spectrums in our community? And what do we do with that as a community? So Eric, my first question is to you. City goal setting, last 2 days, good fun was had by all, I'm sure. And I'd love for you to share your perspective on what we heard about affordability, what we heard about housing, about transportation, and how that's weighing in on goal setting for the City Council.
Great, thanks, Katie. Thanks for the opportunity. This is actually really timely. We actually heard this presentation or a version of it a few weeks ago. Council is, in preparing for their goal setting, conducts a listening session. So the chamber, and we had statistically valid information from this survey. The city conducted its own survey assessing our services and how they're received in Bend, along with neighborhood associations, business groups, environmental groups, et cetera, all gave us input as to what's important. And I want to just emphasize what was said. Transportation and affordable housing are right on top. And that's great to actually have that alignment, because sometimes especially in local government, we get very distracted with somebody is right in our face with an issue, and democracy is a participatory sport, and so whoever shows up gets attention. The surveys that are conducted, and this was very helpful in that goal setting, really helps ground us and say, what about those people that don't participate? What are they concerned about? And so that information got factored in, and as Katie mentioned, we just finished a 2-day goal setting session where our top priorities are transportation, housing, economic vitality, and then just sort of good governance. Those are the buckets that we've developed. And we're coming up with all sorts of innovative ways to address some of the values that were expressed here. So when we talk about transportation, it's not about, here's this list of projects that'll widen some roads or build new roads or some safety improvements. It's really about how do we make Bend affordable and accessible to all? How do we make sure we protect our natural environment? How do we make sure that we don't lose our sense of place, the sort of heritage that we care about? So I think we need to tell our story a little bit differently. And transportation is a big opportunity for us right now. We are building a big transportation plan. We have many folks in the room that are part of that process, and that's the value that I think we want to draw in, is this really inclusive approach of getting all those value sets in, but doing a better job of connecting Project XYZ to the values that were presented in this survey. So great opportunity, great for the city to be able to put this into action.
Great, thanks, Eric. So Preston, why don't you talk a little bit about what 5 Talent does and share with us a little bit of your experience as an employer and what you took away from the survey.
Sure. 5 Talent is a software development company, a new economy company with about 40 some odd staff, mostly middle and upper middle class positions, and most of those folks are fairly new to Bend. We import them mostly out of state in a very tight labor market. So our concerns are around affordable and available housing. As a matter of fact, much to the chagrin of many people in the city, I became extremely upset when I couldn't find a home for a new employee 7 years ago, and that's what activated me. And quite honestly, I've never been active in the public sector and in public discourse until this. And Bend, I've been here now for, since 2003. This is the longest I've ever lived any place after 4 years. So this is home, and I'm, like many of you, extremely interested in the future of Bend, but more importantly, extremely interested in my company growing, which requires employees, which requires housing, which requires infrastructure, and on and on and on.
So Preston, before we leave you, I'd love for you to share what you ended up having to do in order to meet your expansion demands. You've been growing and successful, and without finding housing in Bend, what happens?
Well, we opened an office in Portland, and I didn't want to. I love recruiting folks to Bend. I think Bend is an awesome place. The kind of people that we're bringing in are higher wages and are feeding this economy. We're a great example of an engine of progress and jobs of the future versus jobs of the past. So, but I had to go to Portland because I just couldn't get enough people here. Housing, a number of years ago, became the core issue why people started saying no. And which concerns me that we might see a freeze up where people can't get out of a home and move someplace because of the current market, housing market. So it feels like it's starting to freeze up as far as movement. And Bend requires movement. We have 15,000 jobs, based on that study that was done between now and 2027 that Central Oregon needs to fill. And if you're, as far as businesses, if you're not growing, you're dying. So we need those people to fill those jobs, and we need the houses to put them in. And more importantly, I don't want us to turn into an Aspen where anyone who works as a person in the city or as a barista has to travel from an hour and a half out from a community they can afford to live in. That's ridiculous. We should be able to put up affordable housing in the center of Bend for baristas.
Great, thank you for expanding on that. Kirk Schuler, Brook Resources. Tell us a little bit about the projects you folks have built over the years and more recently, a little bit about your background, and share with us what you've gleaned from the survey as well.
Sure. Brooks Resources is a real estate development company here in Central Oregon. It was founded in 1968 as a subsidiary, of the mill, and has been developing projects in Central Oregon ever since, including projects like Black Butte Ranch, Aubrey Butte, Aubrey Glen, and more recently Northwest Crossing. We that's probably our most recent project. We're continuing developing. We own bare land that we, in the expansion area, in the recent UGB expansion, that we hope to be in the next 12 months developing in the communities. And I think that's, if I was going to try to put a fine point on what Brooks Resources is trying to do, our goal is to create a term that the city has incorporated into their comprehensive plan, complete communities, communities that provide more than just a place to rest your head at night, but serve other purposes during the day for you too. So that's a big goal of ours, and we'd like to think that that's a part of the solution from a standpoint of livability and culture and things like that. Recently, our company has changed or adopted a strategy of developing some income-producing properties, build buildings. We typically haven't in the past built a lot of buildings other than some resort properties like Mount Bachelor Village Resort. We built all those condos and everything. We're building a building so he doesn't have to not grow. And part of that is, a little bit to the point, I think, Katie, where you're going is, we recently made a purchase in the Bend Central District where we bought the old Murray and Holt site. And we did that with the intention of being part of the future of Bend in a lot of ways, and the future vision of Bend, again, represented in the comprehensive plan, to see different kinds of housing, mixed use in the core of our city. And so we hope that that project, and when it comes to be, it plays a big role in not only a first step, be the first step, but to trigger other developments of similar type, mixed-use buildings that provide places to work, to shop, and to live. So the report, there's lots of things in the report I found quite interesting, and one of them that struck me was you were talking about the cross-section of people. When you said that you were able to survey all these people that, not the regular people who participate in surveys, I knew when you said that you got it right, because it said only 16% of the people actually participate in the community. If you would have done the old style, you'd have had 80%, because you'd have got all the people who participate and talk and are at every meeting, like a lot of us. So it's good to know that you surveyed all those other folks that aren't taking their time to be part of this, and I don't knock that. People are busy. The other thing I really enjoyed in the survey was this question of people that move here, and are they different than us? Apparently in the survey, our perception is that they are, and they're bringing some sort of bad habit or some sort of aspect that's going to diminish our lifestyle. But I think we had a similar conversation as we developed Northwest Crossing, which was over 1,400 residential units, and we surveyed our owners and our occupants, and we could follow our satisfaction in the neighborhood was very high, and it made us start to wonder, are the people buying in Northwest Crossing, were they predisposed to live in a neighborhood like that, or did they move there and then grow to like it? And I think it's an analogy, if you will, to what you found in the survey, which was, are people coming to Bend because they're predisposed to live in a place like this? This is what they're looking for, this is what they're searching for? Or are they just randomly moving here and then falling in love with it? And I don't think there's an answer to it, but I think other than yes, because they do like living here. So I really found that interesting about it. As Eric said, we all know, or I should say, we pretty much are aware of what these issues are. Affordable housing has been a factor here I moved here in 1993, and it was affordable housing was an issue then. And so it's worse now, most likely, and for a lot of reasons. Things have grown in this community, not just employment, but tourism, rental housing, overnight rental housing has changed things. So a lot of dynamics have changed over the years, and I think it's more acute now, but it's not new. And I think that's an important thing to remember for everybody who's come here, no matter how long they've been here. And of course, transportation we experience, if you if you drive a car or ride in a car or walk on a sidewalk and look at the traffic stop next to you, you recognize that the congestion is continuing to increase. And I don't think there's a silver bullet for either issue. And the city, I think the leadership issue that was raised about leadership being proactive is very on point on, because that's what's expected now is for our leaders to try to find solutions to some of these problems. And by solutions, I'm not suggesting eradicating these problems, but alleviating them. So.
Check, check. There we go. Thanks, Kurt. All right, David.
Hi.
Share a little bit about YIMBY and then
Okay.
what your perspective is.
So my name is Dave Welton, and I'm also I was born and raised in Oregon, Eugene to be precise. I spent a significant portion of my adult life in Italy, got married, had kids, decided to move back to the United States, and we started looking at Boulder, Colorado. As a software guy, there are a lot of jobs there. Looks like a pretty good place. Checks off a lot of the same boxes that Bend does. Then we started looking at housing prices. And I don't know if you're aware, but it's a similar sized community to Bend, and it's now north of, I think, $800,000 for the median house there. So for a series of reasons, we ended up back in Bend, which as an Oregonian made me pretty happy. Close to my parents, get to see their grandkids. We like it a lot. So we were settling in. I was riding my mountain bike and, just enjoying life here. And I saw that there were some proposed apartments not too far from where we live that COCC was going to develop. And this is in a period, not too long ago, when there's like a 2% vacancy rate, something like that. And an angry mob killed these apartments off in a city with a housing crisis. And I said, that's not right. So, being kind of an introverted software guy, I made a website, started talking to people. That's a lot more in my comfort zone than getting up and speaking in front of people. But we've started talking to people. It's everyone recognizes that housing affordability is an issue. So what we advocate for is more housing and more housing options, pushing both some policies, like some of the stuff that Bend 2030 developed a great series of policies that have been going through council. A lot of them got implemented, but also pushing for projects like the Shovel and Hickson apartments that faced a lot of opposition from people. We need more housing and more housing options. So that's we kind of formed a group to fight for these things and to go to the council meetings and speak in favor of this stuff and write letters and show that there are people that want this stuff. It's not just the angry mobs that don't want it. And regarding these statistics, I think it kind of confirms what most people realize is that Bend is changing. And if we don't adapt to the changes, for instance, if like Boulder, we say, no changes, what changes at that point are the people who can afford to live there. Maybe the physical form of the housing stays the same because you pass some laws for that, but then the only people who can afford to live there are people who can buy an $800,000 house. So I think change is going to happen one way or another. It's how we accommodate it.
Thank you for that. So that kicks us off, but I want to do a quick survey of the audience. Raise your hand if you have been here less than 5 years or less. 5 years. This is life in Bend, people. This is what it's like to be in a community that's totally awesome and growing very, very fast. So the challenge that we have here, my takeaway from this, the bad news of the 58, 60-ish% of those who are surveyed across sections have a really negative vibe on how we're growing, just the concept of growth. And it takes prompting and it takes discussion to get them off that point. So when we think about that, and I want to go back to the apartment building that you mentioned, Dave, because We've seen a lot of that in the paper, and I get what those people are talking about. They're talking about congestion and traffic generation, blocking the view, and in no way this evening do we want to disrespect somebody's opinion on one side or the other. But when you look at that, and you look at the folks that are here, and you think of all of us that are new, and I am totally part of your problem because I moved here 2.5 years ago. So how do we get beyond that? How do we actually start a dialogue that introduces some of this information? So information can take away fear and anxiety. It's just plain simple fact. We also know that with policymakers that trust in policymakers to take this information is a formula. Trust equals accountability over time. Are you responding to my needs over time? So when you think about that, you think about the new folks that are here and a message from the survey that said, we really want our elected leaders, our policymakers, the folks who can actually do something to be planful. That is a word, I looked it up. And, and all the planners in the room are going, yeah. So how do we get beyond this wall, guys? Whoever wants to go up first, I'm going to ask you this pretty soon. How do we get beyond the, oh man, I hate so many new people that are coming here, and to realize the robustness that these new people that are coming are generating jobs, they need a place to live. How do we take this information? What do we do with it?
I can start. So the two issues of transportation and housing, just to tee off with what I said earlier, one of the things that we've been ruminating on, and we'll be fleshing out a plan over the next few months, is that congestion, the congestion issue. That's what people are reacting to. Our survey said it, the survey around growth said it. So how can we there's some tweaks that we can make to our system to make signals more efficient, to just reduce some of those bottlenecks that are fairly low cost. We're doing a big ask of the community, probably in about a year or so, on a transportation package, a funding package, but there's some things that we could do in the interim that shows that responsiveness on just improving the traffic flow throughout Bend. Secondly, on housing, one of the things that we want to do is we've got some opportunities as an agency that's managing infrastructure, so whether it's transportation, sewer. We also have a regulatory authority in terms of keeping oversight over our development code, et cetera. How can we leverage those assets to help spark the development of housing in a way that meets sort of more specific needs throughout Bend? So we've got deficiencies with road projects in Southeast Bend. We've got some sewer challenges in the north end of Bend. What if we put a package of, here are some things that the city can do to remove those barriers? So we can put a capital improvement program together to get sewer capacity or get roads constructed, or we can change our code to make, to remove some of those barriers. But the ultimate goal is to produce more housing units. So the idea of getting more affordability means increasing that supply. We're underbuilt. We have a housing needs analysis that looks at income spectrum and the number of units that we need based on the different income levels in Bend. That's work that we already have. We need to build on it and then incentivize the market through these public-private partnerships. So the mechanism we would use would be like a request for proposal. So it's the government saying, here's what we have to offer. We can put a capital improvement, put some infrastructure, remove some barriers in your code. How can you help us meet our demand and get some housing units on the ground? So those are some of the things that I think will show that responsiveness, build that trust, and show the community that we want to preserve those values of Bend, and we're going to do our best to put an action plan in place.
Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I'm half Colombian, so what I heard in this survey was the people moving in aren't like us, which really puts the hair on my neck up. It feels like a microcosm of the macro issue of immigration, and they don't look like us, they don't talk like us, they don't act like us. They might change us, kind of dialogue. And at the same time, I think everyone has seen the stats of just how much immigrants have brought to the country, let alone Bend. I mean, people moving into Bend are bringing in high-paying jobs. They're the ones hitting the mountain and paying for everyone else to have a greater time on the mountain by expanding the mountain. All those kind of things that are positive impacts. And a diversity of culture. I get tired of seeing Smith and Jones. I like to see Martinez and Ahmed in the mix. So, and so, I think there's some kind of shifting going on. It's, the NIMBY is also about people that don't look like me. This was an argument that happened around the OSU campus. Oh, students, oh my God, they're going to ruin our neighborhoods and all this other stuff. Wait a minute. There are already plenty of 18 to 24-year-olds living in Bend. They're not destroying your neighborhoods now. So it's the reframing of what these people are bringing to our community, right? I mean, look at you and the impact you've had on Central Oregon. No joke, right? So, what we are importing are people who are going to elevate the game for Bend. So I saw that in the survey. The other thing was, I was really fascinated how well you reframe what growth means to everyone by bringing up another fact. That I haven't really seen in other surveys. So I thought that was an amazing way to reframe for people what growth really means in a positive aspect, and that it's inevitable. Right, so.
I just add, Eric's answer was to your question was interesting in that you point out the trust issue, but that's the long term, that's the long game, right? It's going to take a while. When you go to the example you used, which are the apartments being proposed there on the Colorado Bridge, in the moment, in the short term, I find it very hard to change people's opinion, not just in the short term, but in the micro geographic area. There's a 6-story building being built at Ray's that received nobody opposed it, nobody showed up at the public meeting, but this complex received a lot more attention, and for a variety of reasons, but primarily because of its locale and primarily because of its locale and the neighborhood that it's in. But in the short term, I find that a very difficult challenge to change attitudes about growth, and it's not until the long term that people see that, you know what, that really didn't affect me as much as I thought it was going to affect me. We built the Aubrey Village Market up above River's Edge Golf Course, and you would have thought we were putting in a rendering plant. And neighbors were furious with us, primarily when we lost the grocer and we put a call center in there. We put a Unicell moved into that building. And the neighbors were irate, and they talked about how these people were going to be they were going to smoke outside, they were going to sleep in their cars, they were going to, all kinds of things. And yet, in the end, they were a quieter use than a grocery store and much less impactful. We received letters and comments at our real estate office. A gentleman came down and talked in our office, at our office that was up there, apologized for opposing it. So I think in the long term, when people really see how growth affects them directly in their local area, their geographic area, and also over time, a lot of that, and based on that trust, a lot of that gets tamped down, but it's really hard in the moment because, you're building right next to me something, I don't know what it is, and it scares me.
David, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's a good point that was made. There's a piece on LinkedIn by Matt Abrams, one of the investors in Seven Peaks, about growing up in Roseburg. And, growing up in Oregon myself, you can look at any number of former resource towns, Roseburg, Lakeview, John Day, these places that are really hurting. And while we certainly have some problems associated with change, I think it still gives us some leverage and some maneuverability in that we have some money available, we have people invested in the community, we have an economy that's doing pretty well instead of kind of sputtering its last gasp as the the final mill closes down or something. So I think that if you kind of frame it in looking around at what's happening in other places, that we are pretty fortunate to be in the position that we are in, despite some of the challenges that we face. And I'm also a little bit curious about some of this people bringing different values and things. As someone who's very loves to go out on my mountain bike all the time, I've been out in some of these places like China Hat Road, where you can still see like appliances shot up and stuff. that's not the family that moved up here in the Subaru from California. You know, that's been going on a while in a lot of rural places in Oregon. So, you know, when you look at who's damaging things and who's helping and whatnot, I think it's kind of, you have to look at really what people mean with that, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay, so before I go out to the audience, true confessions. My first letter to the editor was when I was 8, and I lived in Gresham, Oregon. And I wrote to the editor, to the city manager and council, that I was opposed to development of housing or anything because it was eating up all the strawberry fields, and I was making some serious money out there.
Oh,
So, just to let you know,
okay.
all of us go through this
good
stuff,
reference.
right? It's tough. New people are coming in, the things that are familiar become unfamiliar, and it's a tough transition. What I'd like to do, so tonight, usually what's brewing, like I said before, we have to limit you to a question. Tonight, I'm not going to do that. So what I'd like to do is generate a dialogue with you. Feel free to ask Ward or Adam or any of our panel a question, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. What's your takeaway? How do we bridge this gap as a community, as businesses, or just as people? Anybody want to go first? Want to share? Okay. And if you could, they tell me it's really hard to see, so if you could kind of do this and make eye contact around so we can get you on camera too, and you'll be next.
I have to go first? Shit.
I heard that.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, you guys. So my question, and I'm just curious, you know, I feel that the built infrastructure supports the livability that we all cherish about Bend. So I'm curious to hear from the standpoint of affordable housing, Kirk and Preston and David as well, or Eric, about transportation. I mean, how do we invest in ways that protect and not protect necessarily, but build off of the attributes of a livable Bend?
You guys want to react? Just keep it really brief so I can keep
I
going.
would just say one thing. I think the streetscape is very important. Volume of cars is obviously what we measure. But again, my office is right on Franklin, right by the St. Francis Church. It's a 2-lane road. It's Franklin Avenue. You go under the bridge, it becomes 3 lanes. The same cars are traveling, but who wants to really walk on the other side? It's not very appealing. It's not very, there's no parking on it. And so I go back to that complete community idea where creating great space is the first step. The transportation issues, I know this is a bit, it's temporary, you know, from about 450 to about 525. I don't really like driving on Franklin, but it is temporary. And not that I change my schedule, but we get so caught up in congestion that it's this thing, but it is very time-based. Look at the schools, look at the traffic around schools, but there's no one up here, there's nobody writing to the editor about the school traffic because it's not really affecting them. It's a short time frame. So I think it's about creating the right space for people to live in, and traffic, so I'm very naive, I guess, traffic will take care of itself over time. You know, it's just, you deal with it and it's over. We've all, if you've all moved here within the last 5 years, the bet is a lot of you came from a big city or a bigger city. Traffic, really? This is not, I lived in San Jose in the late 80s. I lived in Portland all through the, you know, in the early 90s. And yeah, it's not the end of the world. That's me, the developer, so.
Okay. Biased opinion, just saying. Go ahead.
So I surveyed my troops a few weeks ago when this dialogue was actually after the Oregon Business Council presentation, and asked them, you know, 36% of them are single, and the rest are married with kids, et cetera. And I asked them, well, you know, about half our staff live in Redmond because that's where they can afford homes, and these are software developers making great wages, right? They have to live in Redmond. And I asked if you had a, you know, multi-unit apartment complex within 2 blocks, how many of you would move there? Virtually every single one of those who were single said, yes, I would move there, so they could bike or walk. and they would be in the heart of the action. They would be on the river, and that was that apartment complex over by the skating rink. And then I asked the others who were all married with families, if affordable housing that was multi-unit came in, how many of you? I was surprised. A third of them said they would move. They don't want to commute from Redmond, and a few of them are living in Prineville to jobs here. So the idea of more congestion, these folks are driving cars, into Bend instead of walking or riding bikes. So I don't get, and I don't buy the congestion issue for a complex in the middle of the job market.
Any other thoughts? Really quick.
Yeah, where we lived in Italy, we were able to walk to my kids' schools, supermarket, barber, cafe, transit. We could get by with a lot of daily needs just walking over to it. So I think this notion of complete neighborhoods is extremely important. Rather than having, a 6-lane road to get everyone back and forth 5 miles, put the things people need closer to where they live and work. And there's also a good notion from the Strong Towns website of traffic being more like a gas than like a liquid. The more capacity you give it, the more it expands.
That's nice. I like it. Did you want to add anything,
I
Eric?
was just going to say, it really is about optimizing the system. So there is a lot of inefficiency. So it does get congested, but there's really simple things that you can do to change commuting patterns or shift times or practices in terms of having everybody, myself included, where I drive my son to school every morning. Maybe he should ride the bus, right? And so you can use the system more efficiently than we do. And it's a mindset. And it's also this idea of not just complete neighborhoods, but complete streets. So you're moving, people that are walking, that are biking, that vehicles, transit. We have to think differently, and we have technology in our favor to kind of reimagine what Bend could look like in the future, and this idea of mobility hubs where we connect kind of the biking, walking, transit, vehicle use, et cetera, ride sharing. There's a huge amount of opportunity, and our transportation plan is going to help us get there.
Okay. Next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Gottlieb. I'm the owner of Bend Relocation Services here in town. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And I really do appreciate, as I consider myself a representative of this town because I relocate people from all over the country, all over the world to come here. I also relocate people within the town. One of the things that I have found is that people keep saying that, why Bend? Why do you move to Bend? Why do you love Bend? And people will say because of the quality of life or because of the proximity to the outdoors and the schools. And there's a laundry list. But I have found that the commonality is that everybody in life, it's just innate, that people want to feel like they're at home. And Bend, I don't care how busy it is. I don't care how many people are moving here. I don't care how crowded the mountain is. Bend, there's something about Bend that represents home. It is just, it feels right. And when you are here, it's how you want to feel. And it makes you a better person, and you like who you are as a mother, as a spouse, as a whatever role you are. It makes you feel better about yourself. And I think that what I see is that the people that are relocating get slack. Everybody's angry at them, angry at them, angry at them. And I understand it. Objectively, I understand it. I bring them in. I understand that they are making an issue in some ways better, in some ways not. But the people that are angry are the people that can't afford to live here and are angry that you're taking away their home, their place, and that they don't have a choice because this is what feels right to them. And I guess that my question to you is, and so it's easy for them to be angry at the people that are moving here and blame them, because who else are they going to blame? It's easy to put blame there. So I guess my question is, for the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, everybody keeps saying affordable housing. We're working on it. Everybody keeps saying available housing. What does that mean? What does that mean? And also, perhaps are there ways to think outside of the box and do things differently for people that really need the affordable housing that may not be just the low income, cheap apartments? Where are we going with this?
Okay, that's a really good question, and we're not going to answer it yet because I want to make sure I can get to more people. I'm going to just ask everybody. It's a really good thing to share. If you could keep it to like 30 seconds or so, because there's a lot of people who want to say things, and I encourage, that's a really important question about affordable housing and what we can do. And Eric, I know you got a lot to say about it, but I think you had your hand up, did you? And then you, okay.
So my sister-in-law got a job here at 10 Barrel, and 13 people followed. 5 more professionals, 5 kids, and 2 grandparents. So here we all are. I have an unusual lot in that I have one of the septic lots, and I would love to put a UBO or an apartment on it. I'm stuck. I don't have that opportunity yet. I have a big lot. I'm looking forward to when that problem is solved. But separately, coming from the East Coast as one of the many new immigrants to this wonderful place, yes, we're here because of what it is. If it had been somewhere else, we wouldn't be here, although we were following our brother, but they chose this on purpose. Separately, there is a magical spot in Philadelphia. After the invention of electricity and sewage, but before the invention of the automobile and the suburbs like Levittown, that built tight communities where everything was together in one spot. And it's a really wonderful and magical place that I think that there is a new push where people like my daughter who don't have a car would love to have the opportunity to be able to live. And just like 5 talent owners said, the people with the opportunity to move to the center of Bend and experience that tight lifestyle without a car would love that opportunity. And if you guys can find a tool to help that happen, it could make us a better place. Thank you.
All right, and we're going to go over here. Where's the next question so I know where to walk?
Thank you. Kathy Austin. I sit on the city's Affordable Housing Committee, and we do have a definition for affordable housing. And the problem is that we can really only give money to people or projects that meet a need up to 80% of the median income. And so there's a huge gap that private developers need to fill, and that is from 80 to 120, or what's considered workforce housing. And I know the city could create incentives, and then we can also work with our rules, but private developers have to step up, because the problem is, I love Northwest Crossing. I live on the east side of town where I can afford to live. It's so desirable that the prices go up. So what can you do to prevent gentrification or maintain a certain level of affordability in new development that can address a lot of the needs that have been mentioned in this community? Because we're doing a lot for the low and very low income. We give away millions of dollars to help development. Well, actually they're loans, but to help that development. But we can't do anything for that middle market.
So can I maybe,
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
dying.
I
right?
don't want to put you on the spot the whole time, because this isn't a forum about the city. It's a forum about
No, but I would love to
Please go ahead.
get some information, because I think I want to tie those 3 questions together, which it is about this sort of what we call middle market. So how do you provide opportunities and get creative? We can't just sort of look in the rearview mirror and say, let's just keep going and building the single family home. We've got to get creative with housing types. We've got to get creative with financing options. We've got to get creative with sort of repurposing buildings, repurposing, kind of reimagining how we can provide housing. And the bottom line is we're underbuilt. So we did a housing group. There was Bend 2030 was mentioned. I think David mentioned that. The best work that happens in Bend is when we collaborate. So when builders, environmental groups, advocates, et cetera, we all get together and we come up with solutions. There was a whole bunch of good recommendations that as we are kind of churning through, like getting more duplexes and triplexes in neighborhoods. We're going to up our game and look at fourplexes. We're going to talk about how we can remove some of those barriers that are in our code that were from kind of years past, so that we just provide more opportunities. Financing like your system development charges, getting those financed over a longer period of time to lower that cost. The idea of really getting infrastructure, so that I talked about asking the private sector, what are your barriers? And putting a mechanism in place so we can say, we can solve that for you. It's public and private working together instead of, but it requires some openness. So as a public agency, we can't just dole out money and say, here's a road for this project to make it pencil. We need to see your books. So as a developer and a public agency, they need to see what we're working with, we need to see what they're working with, and then come to the middle. So it requires that kind of transparency. That's when the good stuff happens, is when we work in this, what I call kind of a mixed economy, and public and private are open with each other, and that's when we can produce the housing that we really need.
And the policy that you folks just passed on densification of 6,000 and 9,000 square foot lots can help that, and that also addresses some of the integration of a variety of housing within existing communities that is place-based, which is a lovely option to have and a welcoming thing to do for folks who are moving from all sorts of different places. And I'm going to go to you next.
Thank you. Hey, my name is Aaron. I'm a local home builder here in town, and I just wanted to address a few things that I've heard. I would love to build more affordable housing here in Bend, but I feel like I'm a little bit priced out. I think the city could help out. Each of you living in a house, you have at one point paid SDC charges, and we're at about minimum $30,000 per house to pay the city for permits. About half of that goes to Parks and Rec. I could show you a little outline of where that money's going. That seems like a ton of money, and it's hard for me to conceive of paying or building affordable housing here in town when I'm shelling that much out. I also, when I put together a budget, I propose about a quarter of my budget goes to land. So if you were to jump on Redfin right now, you could see on the east side, probably the cheapest is $95,000 for a parcel of land, which puts me at about 400 grand. And that's out of my price range too, when I build homes. So I guess, Brooks, I love you guys. Carol Hayworth, great lady. I hope you guys save a little bit of land for some of the other smaller time builders and entities in town, and I hope that the city could jump in too and maybe help out with some of these fees. I just looked at doing small apartments here in downtown. I was looking at a $50,000 to $60,000 bill for permits, which really it comes down to price for everybody, so that's out. It just doesn't pencil. So I'm not sure if I had a question, but I guess that's a perspective from the building side of things for you.
You came to the right night. It's okay to do that tonight. So just the price point of actually building a wide variety of housing for our community. And is there somebody way in the back? If you could if you wouldn't mind coming up here so that the cameras can get you and everybody else can see you.
Hi, my name is John Short. One of the things that I think Ben should look into as far as affordable housing and stuff like that is the mobile home park co-ops that Oregon law now permits. I'm hoping to become a member of the Westside Pines co-op later this year, but it would be nice if there was more than one option, and I think that's a great way to increase the affordable housing market and reduce renting while at the same time making effective use of land. So.
Great, thanks. I'm going to shift the conversation just for a moment and talk about when somebody new comes to town, or even if you've been here a long time, and that statistic that was up here about how everybody says that if you're really a Bendite, you participate, but only about 13% actually do. So as folks who live here, work here, how do we reach out to our neighbors and how do we engage? What does that look like? What do we stand to gain? And how do we make that happen? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Ruth, of course you have a thought on that. Sure, go ahead. Anyone? Yep. No, go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to make a plug, Ben 2030. Preston, you've been involved. Eric, you've been involved from the beginning. Kirk, you've been a big sponsor. A lot of people in this room have impacted Ben 2030 over the years. I think it is important that we have a way for the city to get input from the community that is unsolicited by you guys, but informs the decision-making of the councilors, especially at this time. And I think there's a really robust way to have and host that conversation that gives you guys real workable information to make decisions upon, and is inclusive and builds ownership and creates conversation and dialogue. Katie, this is a great forum for the same. City Club, another forum. So these conversations matter, and they engage us in a way that creates ownership of the future. So there you go.
Thanks, Ruth. We have another comment over here.
Hey there, Jackie Westover. Quick question to this. How do we involve the neighborhood communities? So we've got all these neighborhoods. I'm a member of one, but I do my thing through kind of work. But how do we get into the neighborhoods to get them involved? Because I think that's the bigger issue. We talk about the survey that was done, and we did, it sounds like, reach a broad scope of people in Bend, but how do we get to the people that aren't involved? How do we get them out here?
Katie, do you mind?
Go for it.
So Ben 2030 actually engaged neighborhood associations and trying to get associations that in the past represented populations that many felt were overlooked, like the East Side. Getting East Side neighborhood associations involved in these discussions around the housing. I wasn't involved in the transportation one, I was involved around the housing one, and they were included in those discussions from the very beginning. But not enough. I mean, there are hundreds of neighborhood associations, and only a handful of those were participating. So I think the city, it's not really the city's job to include those. It's the opinion gathering, as you mentioned, Ben 2030 and other groups like Hubbell, et cetera, that need to engage the HOAs and those association members. But I do want to say, if you don't mind, on culture. That's the word I get when we say, well, how do we involve these people newly moved in? And someone asked me, well, what's the culture of Bend? Well, what day is it? Because it's changing every day, right? As we add people, the culture's changing, whether we like it or not. It's a dynamic culture. We're not a static Burns, thank God. We're dynamic. So the real question for me is, how do we get those following behind us, since most of us moved here, how do we get them to adapt to some of the ideas that we believe Bend represents? Be nice, be kind, be involved, love the outdoors, don't throw trash, all these things that we take as part of our innate culture and pass it on to the next person behind us. And I don't have an answer for that, but that's, if we're going to translate or transfer culture, at least the base of it, it has to be human to human, not some study, not some document. It's people talking to people and translating it.
And Adam's going to comment on that.
Great comment. And as much as I appreciate neighborhood associations, anything that has the smell of process, public sector, no. Here's my advice to all of you based on all the years I've been doing this. You've got to go to the people. You can't expect them to come to you. You've got to go to where they work, where they play, and where they pray. And faith-based organizations, I'll take that one example, that is such a big part of many Oregonians' lives. Somehow the state thinks we're not religious. I'm just using the pray part of this. But if you want to connect to people, look at the faith-based organizations. They're community in many ways for people. And there's a passing of the baton in terms of leadership of these faith-based organizations. They want to be part of this community. You have people there that would be interested in many of the issues you are talking about because they're part of the community. Go to the big employers. Have discussions during lunch breaks, receptions late in the afternoon, whatever. Intercept people at their favorite places and talk to them about these issues. It's so darn difficult. These are the most difficult times I've seen in terms of increasing public awareness and knowledge, engaging people, because there's such cynicism and skepticism out there, you guys. So my advice is you go to them, don't expect them to come to you. Okay? Neighborhood association meetings, you'll continue to see the same usual suspects. So take those volunteers, you neighborhood associations, and get them out. Go to the big employers, the small employers, the medium-sized employers. Develop some relationships with the faith-based organizations. Just some advice from my end.
Just a bazillion years of doing this kind of work. Okay, so I'm sorry, we got to wrap it up, guys. We're at the 7 o'clock witching hour. I'm sorry. And what I want to do is remind everybody that this survey is online. It is, I'm sorry, and it is online and available to everybody. It's on the Chamber website, it's on the Hubbell website, and let's continue on this conversation, and let's keep it rich and robust and figure out how we keep building the culture that is our community in Bend. Thank you again for coming tonight, and be safe out on the roads. Good night.